top 8 YCS Pasadena Cyber Dragon deck. Before I review this deck, I'd like to give a huge shout out to Brian Ramirez for making it. Congratulations on your top at YCS Pasadena. Top 8 is a phenomenal achievement, especially when you're playing a deck that is probably, I would say, this low in the tier list or in rogue tier. Great job, and I'm glad that you got such an achievement with the deck. So with that being said, YCS Pasadena just ended. We got to see that in the top 8, I believe there was 4 strikers, 3 Goki, and this Cyber Dragon deck. We kind of understand the meta from YCS Pasadena's standpoint, and although the meta is probably going to change very soon in the form of an upcoming ban list, I wanted to review this deck and explain why it had the success it did, what you could learn from this specific deck, and how it fares moving forward. So let's get into it. So at the start, we have the 3 Cyber Dragons, 3 Cyber Dragon cores, the Hertzes, the 1 Vire, the 3 Galaxy Soldiers. This is all pretty standard, and it's just basically part of the core. It's the agreed set ratios that Cyber Dragon players have come to a conclusion that these are the amounts that you should be playing, and there's not too much to say about it. We all know that why these cards are good and why you played at these ratios, so that's that. For Jizukuru to start destroying Kaiju. Now, I played this at Ohio, and since then, I've cut it from my version of the deck. Jizukuru is a card that's good against Striker and good against some meta matchups. It's good against Thunder Dragons in the form of getting over a single Colossus or a single Titan, and it's good against Strikers because you sack their monster to shut off all their Sky Striker spells and traps. The reason why I don't personally like it is because I feel like it's not prevalent enough in enough matchups for it to be good. Against Thunder Dragons, you can't really search it because they have Colossus, and overall, it's kind of only good when you're going second, which in fair case you would be able to do most of the time, but I feel like there are better cards that you can run over Jizukuru in this meta. It doesn't help you get over multiple threats, and I feel like instead of Jizukuru, I would rather run something like Cyber Altanian, because although it's not very good against Strikers, it's a lot better than Thunder Dragons, which I believe is a worse matchup for you, as it gets over like their whole Thunder Dragon board. So of course that does get hit by Valor, but I believe in most cases it is better than Jizukuru. Jizukuru, although is a solid one-off card, when you do draw it in those specific scenarios where it comes in handy, it's very good. So I don't really disagree with the card, but I do believe in some scenarios there are cards that are better to run over Jizukuru. Now, he played 3 Ashes and 3 Drolls. I believe that in this current meta, where it's very Goki relevant, it's very FTK prevalent, and it's very, like, it's in a meta where people want to search, and people just want to go off and create these extra link boards or FTKU, I think that Ash and Droll is very good. Ash is good because it hits a lot of the meta cards regardless of what deck you're playing. And Droll is good for 2 very good reasons. The first reason why Droll is good is because when you Droll someone, it generally forces your opponent to make a mediocre play at best or pass on a very weak board. And this directly correlates to one of Cyber Dragon's strengths, which is exposing vulnerability in your opponent's play. And Droll is really good because it does exactly that. It makes your opponent have a really weak board, and then it lets you, as a Cyber Dragon player, abuse that because you're able to just OTK them because they have such a weak board, or you're able to establish so much that it overwhelms your opponent and gives you a huge tempo lead. So Ash and Droll are very good in this format. It also gets over stuff like Midbreaker Field, which is pretty relevant when you're playing against FTK and Goki. So because of those reasons, these are probably the best 6 hand traps to run in Cyber Dragons at the moment over stuff like Ghost Ogre or Ghost Bell, just because of how strong they are and how versatile they are, and because they're just so good at doing what it does. I didn't run them at Ohio because I didn't expect to be versing as much Goki, and FTK wasn't really a thing, so Droll wasn't as powerful, and because you're kind of playing a combo heavy deck that needs a lot of cards, I didn't want to fill my deck with a lot of hand traps rather than play extenders, because it was more important to me at the time to play more board heavy because FTK and Goki weren't a thing. But because FTK and Goki are so prevalent in the meta right now, Droll and Ash become a lot stronger as a power card, and they stop your opponent from making these things that you can't come back from. And because you're playing a Go second deck, Droll and Ash are needed at these ratios because you just can't allow your opponent to establish either an overwhelming advantage against you, or you can't allow your opponent to just make and win the game off turn 1. So Ash and Droll, definitely really good choices in this meta, and just good cards to play. Going into the spells, we have the 3 Cyber Emergency, the 2 Repair Plant, and the 1 Rev System. These ratios are pretty standard. We all know that they're good cards. Searching Power adds consistency, and the 1 Rev System is just great as an extender, as a card to recycle resources, and just like basically a Monster Reborn in a sense. So standard ratios. The 1 Cyberload and the 1 Overload fusion. So I believe that running Cyberload and Overload are good, but I don't believe that running it at 1 each is especially good. And I'll tell you why. So in this deck, you have a few power cards that just net you overwhelming advantage. And Overload Fusion is one of those power cards. Machine Dupe is also one of those power cards. Machine Dupe is one of those power cards for obvious reasons, as it pushes 2 Cyber Dragons on your board, which is really good. Overload Fusion is really good in that aspect because Overload Fusion basically says 3 things. It says destroy 2 or more spells and traps. You gain a monster that Foolish Burials twice, and you also get a monster that can potentially attack 3 times. That's what Overload Fusion does. And it's such a strong blowout card that once you resolve it successfully, you almost always win the game if you're either even or ahead. And even if you're behind, it like helps you come back. And it does so much for you. Now, I can understand running 1 because it's kind of a brick, and running more than 1 lowers the consistency of your deck. Because if you're going to be running 2 Cyberload or 2 Overload, it's not a card that you want to open up with 2. And I know that you kind of only want to ever use 1 in your deck. But I feel like when you run it at low ratios, you aren't able to see it enough. And it's a card that you really want to see. So I understand that at a big event, you want to minimize your risk and improve consistency as much as possible. And you also need to make space for Ash and Droll. I just also believe at the same time that if you want to have fun with the deck and you want to play your deck to the most higher risk, high reward potential base of that deck, it is most of the time better to run 2 Overload Fusions. The 1 Cyberload is completely fine. I like playing 2, but I think 1 is completely fine as well because I believe it's preference, and 1 is generally more consistent than running 2. It's just that going into the traps really quickly, if you're going to be running 1 Cyberload, 1 Overload, and 1 Overflow, and you're playing like a 2 to 3 turn deck where the game ends in 2 to 3 turns, your Cyberload isn't generally going to be free. So if you can't use it to kill your opponent, shuffling 2 monsters back from your board isn't horrible, but it isn't good either. So in essence, I want to play more Overload Fusion just so I can get a freer Cyberload Fusion. So that's my opinions on playing 1 of each. I think it's fine because it minimizes risk and it improves consistency, but at the same time it reduces your potential power play of your deck. 3 Machine Dupes is completely fine. And the staple tech spells. So the 1 Foolish Burial is fine. We know that you can mill Core and Hurts with it. So it's good that way. The 1 Monster Reborn is also fine. Monster Reborn is just good in the Cyber Dragon deck. The 1 for 1 is a card that I don't necessarily agree with. So 1 for 1 is a card that makes you pitch a monster to summon a level 1 from your deck. And there's basically only 1 level 1 that you're going to summon because you're never going to be summoning Droll. And that level 1 is Hurts. Hurts has an effect that says when you special summon it, you can make it level 5. In Brian Ramirez's deck profile, he said he wanted to do this because it helps you get an extra body on board, which is relevant in Cyber Dragons. I mean Thunder Dragons. And I agree that it does help you against Thunder Dragons. The problem with that is there's not really any monsters that you ever want to discard with 1 for 1. You're only discarding Cyber Dragon if you're already having a monster on the board. You're almost never discarding Core. And if you do discard Core against Colossus, that's fine. But you have to think about at that point, is it really worth it to get a Hers on board? If you discard a Hers, that basically means that you're getting either a vanilla level 5 or you're getting a Search and a level 1 on board. which means that one of the hearts are going to be wasted, and hearts going to Link Karibo isn't really the best play. Discarding Vire is fine, but it kind of defeats the purpose of playing 1-for-1 in general, because the point of playing 1-for-1 is to get extra monsters on board, and Cyber Dragon Vire, or Fear, as people have told me that it's supposed to be pronounced, is basically getting an extra monster on board anyways. Galaxy Soldier is also a card you don't really want to discard, because it's a really important combo piece, so it's kind of like, it also is like kind of defeats the purpose, because you want to spell summon Galaxy Soldier from your hand as a level 5. Discarding Chizukuru when it's a brick card is fine, but you're almost never going to have that scenario where you have 2 of your 1-ofs in your hand, and you could be discarding Chizukuru in an advantageous state where you're going to want to activate 1-for-1. And obviously discarding hand traps, we kind of know the philosophy behind that. You don't really want to unless you have to. So yeah, I think 1-for-1 becomes a lot better when Cyber Dragon naturally comes out, because it gives you a more of a plus and board advantage. But I think as of the current moment, 1-for-1 isn't strong enough to justify running over a power card such as Soul Charge, let's say, or Instant Fusion, where you could also get a level 5 on board. Of course, Instant Fusion requires you to modify your extra deck, but I believe you could find space for it in most scenarios. And I believe that Instant Fusion overall, most of the time, in this current meta at least, in this current state of the deck, is better than 1-for-1. That's just my opinion. Going to traps, the 1 Chimera Tech Overflow, Cybernetic Overflow, makes sense. You play that 1, you don't want to play 2 because it's kind of a brick. And like I said, at a big event where you're playing multiple rounds, you want to minimize your risk. So that's why you're playing lesser of these power cards to improve overall consistency. Plus you need to find space for the 3 Drolls and the 3 Ashes. The 2 Impermians, we talked about it already, pretty standard, pretty good. Not really much to comment here. And the 3 Evenly Matches. Now, Evenly Match is a very interesting card, where my opinion on it is basically based on what level of event you're playing at. At a YCS event, where you're playing a multitude of rounds, and no one knows what you're playing, Evenly is good because you get a lot of value out of it. Generally, people won't know what deck you're playing and what text you're playing until, like, playoffs, which is top 32 or top 64 or whatever top it is, which means that you almost always get the maximum value out of Evenly Match every round, because people will commit into you thinking you don't mean Evenly Match because they don't know what you're playing. And this is good at YCS because it's a long number of rounds. You're going to be playing a lot of different people, probably none of which actually know what you're playing, unless you're playing someone that does know what you're playing. So Evenly Match gains a lot of value because you're able to resolve it a lot, and whenever you resolve it, you generally gain the maximum out of it, which means that your game 1 generally will go very smoothly because you're playing a go second deck. Naturally, you're ahead going second, and Evenly Match will generally chop 3 to 4 cards from your opponent's board, which gives you an overwhelming advantage in most matchups. Now, at a local level, it's a bit different. Sorry, my mouth is getting dry. So at a local level, it's kind of a bit different. When people know you're playing Evenly Matched, it's easier to play around, and it's easier to be like, alright, you're gonna go first. And in a deck that wants to go second so badly because you're playing cards like Chizukuru, 6 hand traps, 1 overload, 1 cyberload, 1 overflow, 2 impermanents, 3 Evenly Matches, you really want to go second because there's just so many bad cards going first. And it's also easier to play around. You could commit less to the board where it's enough to stop what Cyber Dragon wants to do, but it's not enough to get hit by an overwhelming Evenly Matched. And it's just that at a local level, when people know that you're playing evenly, yes, there's those decks that need to commit heavily to the board, but it's also at the same time, you can commit heavy to the board without committing heavy to the board. Like, Sky Striker doesn't need to go full out multi-roll for 3 and create this huge board that gets hit by Evenly Match. Also, guys doesn't need to go summon monsters set 4. True Draco doesn't need to go and put everything on their board unless they have Demise. Like, you can still create strong boards with these decks without fully committing your hand onto the board. And this basically lowers the value of Evenly Matched. So in my opinion, if you're going to be playing at a locals with 6 rounds or less, and less than maybe 40 people, I don't think Evenly Matched is good, because people will know that you're going to be playing it, and therefore you're going to be playing around it or playing in ways that you won't be able to gain the maximum value out of evenly matched. Out of YCS, it's very good because you gain the most value out of it and people won't be expecting it or be playing around it in game one of most of your rounds. This is why I believe it's played a lot at YCS or regional level Cyber Dragon decks. And this is why Brian played it. This is why Blair played it at 200 at Ohio. And this is also why I believe Nick topped with it at Ohio. So it's a very understandable card. But if you're going to be looking at this deck list and be playing it at locals, I would recommend you heavily consider playing evenly matched at a local level for the reasons I've stated. So let's go into the extra deck before we go into the side deck. I'm just going to be throwing this to stop dueling book inactivity. So we have the one Linkuriboh. Linkuriboh is a card that in this deck, I don't believe it's strong enough to play. And people will argue and say that you could go Hertz into Linkuriboh and this will unbreak your hand because it will get you a Cyber Dragon and a Repair Plant. Here's my philosophy on it. If you're going normal summon Hertz, summon Linkuriboh, search, add a Repair Plant, you're basically saying summon Linkuriboh, pass. And this is really bad because you're already playing a Ghost second deck, which means your opponent has already set up their plays on turn 1. In the best case scenario, you go maybe evenly matched into Linkuriboh, or you go 1-for-1 Hertz into Linkuriboh. If you have 1-for-1 Hertz into Linkuriboh with a Cyber Repair Plant, then okay, you made a play. It's pretty good. Okay, but that requires you to draw your 1-for-1 and then having a Cyber Repair Plant, which are basically 3 cards that you're probably not going to have together most of the time. If you're going just Hertz evenly, that's also okay, but it requires you to have an evenly, a Hertz or 1-for-1, and a Repair Plant in order for you to reestablish, because core is so important to this deck. And the way that you can only get core when you have that board is if you have Hertz Cyber Repair Plant. And Hertz Cyber Repair Plant is basically saying Linkuriboh, search a core, and pass. And there's just so many decks that could abuse you doing that. I do think that Linkuriboh is a good card in general, but I think going Hertz, Linkuriboh, pass, and going set Hertz, pass is almost the same thing. And in most scenarios, you're not going to be using Linkuriboh too much. The best scenario where you use Linkuriboh is if you already have a core in your graveyard and you have a Hertz that's already on board. So on the next turn, you link that core off for a Linkuriboh, or you special summon at the Linkuriboh from your graveyard by attributing Hertz, and then you add a core to normal summon. That's probably the best case scenario. I don't really see it happening often because in over 100 games of playing the deck, I just don't really see it being too relevant. But that's where I see the deck, or where I see it having the most value. So that's just my opinion on Linkuriboh. Cleave Genius is a card that gained a lot of relevance in the past format. It does negate the Colossus, which is something that's relevant and it's good. So I do believe that going forward, Cleave Genius will be a better card in Cyber Dragons and to be played more of. A lot of Brian Ramirez's points that he made about how it secures wins against Sky Strikers is very true, is very prevalent, and it is good against Thunder Dragons. It's a good link to in general. And my opinion has changed over the time that the meta has shifted. That Cleave Genius is a good card in Cyber Dragons now, and it is worth running. A lot of us Cyber Dragon players did cut it, but because of how the meta is shifted, it is a lot better now, and I probably would consider playing it again. The 1 Seeker is fine. You don't need to play 2. I like playing 2, but 1 is completely fine. Summon Sorceress and Griffin. I did a combo on I'm So Angry's channel previously explaining how this combo works. I feel like this combo is good, but I feel like without playing Soul Charge, you can't fully abuse this combo to the maximum potential. And this also applies to playing Consider Pallades. So these 3 cards in this extra deck, I believe, can be changed for something that might be better, just purely because he doesn't play Soul Charge. And you might be thinking, oh, Soul Charge is a 1-of. How could you justify playing your deck around a 1-of card? And the thing is that like I said, when you're playing at a YCS level and you're playing like 10 rounds, 11 rounds, 12 rounds, you're going to be seeing that soul charge a few times. So it's going to happen. And you playing cards like Summon Sorceress, Griffin, and Pallades, like Brian Ramirez said it himself that he almost never resolved his combo during Swiss. And it's just because the combo is relatively not super common to resolve. It requires you to open up a dupe, an extender, and a core hurts. And it just doesn't happen enough for you to play it in that specific style. With that being said, I believe that Slurk and Griffin are still able to be played in that style even without Soul Charge. I just believe that most of the time, it's better to play Soul Charge with it than without it. In the scenarios that you do activate this combo, god damn it. In the scenarios that you do activate the combo, when you're playing without Soul Charge, it is good, but it also requires you to open up with a style of cards or a specific set of cards where basically you opened up the nuts. And like we saw in the feature match where Brian Ramirez was playing against Blair Hunter, shout out to Blair Hunter by the way, that Brian Ramirez basically opened up with the nuts. Blair Hunter didn't have an Ash to stop him, and he drew an Impermeance off the combo. And it's kind of interesting because Blair actually came back from most of that. I believe he did something to get over the Griffin, and then he swang into the Sager and the Infinity to get over those too. So he was actually able to come back from the combo. So it's just like that. Without Soul Charge, the combo isn't as strong as it should be. And it is okay playing the Summon Sorceress and the Griffin because Summon Sorceress is a good card in general. And Griffin doesn't make Summon Sorceress good. Summon Sorceress is just good. So it's okay to play. I just believe that I would have liked to see Soul Charge in the deck because of how good the combo is. Pallades, this is a card that you could have cut for Instant Fusion and Panzer Dragon if you wanted to. All Cyber Dragon players will tell you, it's a card that you want to keep in your extra deck. You just go into it so little. So when it comes up, it's good when it comes up, but it just almost never comes up. I don't want to cut it from my deck either. I just feel like the more I play Pallades, the less I like it. And I would be considering playing something like Volcanosaurus in Cyber Dragons, especially when Time Lords are so prevalent right now. So, good card. I like it, but I also hate it at the same time. The 2 Nova and the 2 Infinity are pretty standard. It makes sense. Cyber Dragon deck, why not? The Rampage Dragon is pretty standard. I do believe that he could have played 1 just because he was playing such a low fusion count. But I believe he played 2 just in case it came up. He said it came up once, so relevance. So 2 was fine, I guess. I just believe that you could have got away with playing 1 because the only way that you summon it without your fusions is Nova. And the way that Brian Ramirez built his deck is that you either wanted to see Overload or Cyberload. You never really wanted to resolve both, which is the reason why playing 1 you could have got away with. And because no one is almost ever going to pop your Nova. And if you do pop your Nova, that basically eliminates the relevance of you needing a Cyberload or Overload at the time. The 2 Mega Fleets, pretty standard. And the Fortress, also relatively standard. Yeah, not too much to say about the extra deck. It looks good. I can see it definitely working. But I also believe that some cards could have been more interchangeable. And overall, like, it did well. And it worked for Brian because of how the deck was built. So, yeah, I think the extra deck is fine if you do want to play it this way. Going into the side deck, Prankertops, good card. Doesn't conflict with Cyber Dragons, pretty good. Could have been in the main order side. And playing it at 2, I believe, is the correct number because it's the correct number where you draw it enough to see it, but it doesn't break your hand. The 3 Inspector Borders. Inspector Borders is a good card in Cyber Dragon. It's searchable, although you don't search it much. So, not a criticism, but to reiterate the point of why you're playing 3 Inspector Borders, even though you can search it. Inspector Borders is one of those cards that kind of is only good when you're going first, and you can drop it on turn 1. And on turn 1, you generally don't not use up your normal summon and repair plant at the same time. The only time that ever happens is if you either already have a monster on board, in which case you're not able to normal summon the Inspector Boarder, or if you like Foolish Burialed. And hoping to open up with a 1-of and a Cyber Propellant just isn't really feasible. So the reason why you would play 3 now is because you want to see it as much as you can, and because it's such a blowout card when you're going first and you drop it. I'm going to talk about Book of Eclipse last. The 3 Twin Twisters are good against a lot of matchups. I've cut it recently, but in the style that Brian plays the deck, you should be playing Twin Twisters, because it's good in the current meta after you get over back row, and because he was really scared of Altergeist, Twin Twister is such a good card against Altergeist. Same thing for Red Reboot. So these 5 back row hate cards are just good against back row heavy decks. And it's just good in general to play Twin Twister and Red Reboot. Goes in matches a Floodgate. It's pretty good. Kind of a blowout when it does stay on the board. And goes in matches especially good in Brian's deck because he doesn't play as much back row. So generally people are more prone to be siding out back row removal against them, like Twin Twisters. Like Brian's deck is something that you wouldn't really side Twin Twisters into because you wouldn't be expecting Floodgate cards. And Gozen is really good going first in those scenarios where you're playing against Goki or FTK, where you're basically forced to go first because you don't want to rely on drawing the nuts in forms of hand traps. So Gozen in those scenarios are very good. Playing it to it fine because he said he didn't want to rely on it. So Gozen match completely fine. Now, Book of Eclipse is a card that I had really strong opinions about because you're basically playing Thunder Dragon. You're playing Book of Eclipse to play against Thunder Dragons and sometimes Gokis. It's good against Goki and FTK if they make the scenario where they have a monsters on board. You activate Book of Eclipse, yeah, they draw a bunch, but it stops their play, and they're going to draw a bunch regardless of their play anyways. So in that essence, Book of Eclipse is really good because it protects you, and it also helps your opponent stop their play. Now, against Thunder Dragons, I do not think Book of Eclipse is good against Thunder Dragons in Cyber Dragons. And the reason why is because of this. Book of Eclipse turns off Colossus and Titan, yes. But Book of Eclipse also doesn't help you get rid of Colossus and Titan. Which means that after you Book of Eclipse a Colossus and Titan, you can make a board, you can do whatever you want. But because their monsters are in face-down defense position, you aren't able to take them with your Infinity. Furthermore, they basically can't be destroyed by battle if your opponent has enough Thunder Dragon monsters in your graveyard or Thunder monsters in their graveyard, which most of the time, they're going to have like 3 or 4. So you can't really kill the Colossus and Titan after you make the board. Because if you look at the deck, right, let's see what actually kills Colossus. You have Clover Genius. Yes, that kills Colossus and Titan. Other than that, none of these monsters, other than Pallades, Genius, and if you can possibly Mega Fleet, actually gets rid of like their monsters. And that's a problem because you can, like, let's say they have 2 Titans or 2 Colossuses. Let's say they have 2 Colossuses. And one's in the extract monster zone, one's in the main monster zone. You can Mega Fleet one, but how do you kill the other one? Because you can't Genius a card that's face down, I believe. Yeah, you have to target a face up card. And by the way, Genius can also target non-monster cards, so that's one of the other reasons why Genius has become really good. You can't target face down Colossuses, so that Colossus is going to remain face down. And when it flips face up, you're probably going to hit it because you don't want your opponent to draw a card off of it. But if you hit it, you banish a Thunder Dragon monster from your opponent's graveyard, which means they get to activate a Thunder Dragon monster effect. And overall, it's just like, Book of Eclipse doesn't help you get rid of the problem, which is why I don't really like it in the current meta. And, like, not being able to get rid of Titan and Colossus is just, like, so big. Because you're basically band-aiding the problem, and you're not fixing the problem. And that's my opinion on Book of Eclipse. I think that if you were to play Cyber Eltanian in the Thunder Dragon matchup specifically, because this is like the primary reason why you're playing Book of Eclipse. The secondary reason is because it helps against Goki and FTK. But the primary reason is because you want to get over Thunder Dragon cards. If you're going to be playing in multiple Cyber Eltanian, Eltanin, however you want to pronounce it, this is a card that sends all face-up monsters on the field to the graveyard. So if you drop this against a board of multiple Colossuses, this is a card that basically gets rid of everything. And because it sends, they can't use cards to prevent its destruction. Yes, this could get Valor, this could get Impermeanced, but I believe that most of the time, it's a better option than Book of Eclipse because it gets rid of the problem. Now, like I said, when you're playing at a YCS level event, you're playing 9 rounds, 10 rounds. You want to minimize risk. Cyber Eltania is a very risky card in the form that if you do get Valor and you don't have a follow-up play against Thunder Dragons, you will most likely lose. Book of Eclipse is a card that's very low risk for basically medium reward. It's a card that says if you activate it, it's almost always going through, it's never getting stopped, and it doesn't really net you anything. It's a temporary band-aid solution in order for you to come back on board. Cyber Altania is a card that basically blows your opponent out. If your opponent can't respond to it, it's a high-risk, high-reward card. And the way that Brian built his deck is that it's very low risk, which means that at a big event, it works relatively well because you don't have a lot of risks in your deck, which means that you maximize on consistency and you basically lower the amount of risk that you have while playing the game. And it's very shown in the way that he built his deck. It's shown in the way that how he played his hand traps with playing multiple Ash and Droll to prevent his opponent from going off. It's shown in the fusion number account how he plays, where he plays low amounts of fusion cards in order to gain the least amount of risk by breaking with them. It shows in the one overflow that he plays where he has low risk. It shows in the Jizukuru where Jizukuru gains more value because you play it at longer rounds. And it shows in Book of Eclipse and cards like Twin Twister and River Boot. The deck is very well crafted because it's so low risk and therefore it performs well at high level events because you're playing such a multitude of rounds. And decks that rely on high risk cards generally will not perform as well in multitude of round tournaments because it's higher risk, and the more rounds you play, the more chances there are of you getting brickier hands. With that being said, I do believe if you're playing the deck for fun or at a locals, it's more enjoyable to play high risk because it's more fun that way, in my personal opinion. Either way, I think the deck is very well crafted. Like I keep saying, you probably get tired of hearing it by now, but it's very low risk. It's very consistent in how it should be played. I think the main deck was crafted in a way that's very good with dealing with the current meta because it deals with Goki and FTK, which is probably the most popular two decks. And I believe that overall, the deck was crafted in a way that it works very well. I did have my opinions on some of it, but going back and looking at how his matches went, the Inspector border was definitely very good against Altergeist. The Eclipses were good against Thunder Dragons when you played it in his feature match against Blair, I believe. Twin Twister and Red Boot, back row hate, which is good against Altergeist. Goes in match, great card in general. The evenly matches in the main did so much work for him probably because people just didn't see it coming, and you would just be able to evenly people for 3 or 4. Cleaver Genius, which is great. The Link Karibo, which I did have my opinions about, but I think it's fine overall. The Summon Sword Griffin combo, where he said he pulled it off a lot in Top Cut. That's great for him. He was able to pull it off, and he probably gained a huge advantage off of it, which is good. And everything else was basically standard. Just before we leave, we're addressing the one loss that he did have. So one of his 2 losses in Swiss was to Altergeist, and you could kind of see why, because Altergeist is a deck that could actually play around evenly matched, given the Altergeist player knows what he's doing. And I believe the Altergeist player was a person that went undefeated in Swiss, so it looks like he definitely knew what he was doing. Droll and Ash don't really hit Altergeist as hard as you would want it to, because Droll hits almost nothing other than spoofing into Desires, which usually doesn't go off too often. And Ash only hits Multi-Faker, and it doesn't even hit Multi-Faker if you have Protocol, because Protocol stops you from negating Multi-Faker. The one Cyberload, the Impermeances, generally in the main deck, you have a hard matchup versus Altergeist because you have a lot of dead cards. Jizukuru doesn't really do much. Ash Blossom doesn't really do much. The one Cyberload and the one Overload means you're not going to be able to Chimera Tech Rampage them as much, which is really prevalent for getting over their back row. Impermeance is almost never going to work because they also always have Protocol, and you only play one Overflow, and Overflow is very strong in the Altergeist matchup because it gets to be a complete blowout to them. And Evenly is good, but in the cases where Altergeist knows how to play around the evenly match, or they know you're playing it, it loses a lot of its value. As you can see, you cited very heavily for Altergeist matchup. The Prankatops, Inspector Borders, Twin Twisters, and River Roots, and Goes in Match. Basically, you could have potentially 12 cards sided in for Altergeist. But the way that the deck was built, it just means that game 1, you're generally going to have a bad time against Altergeist. So the Altergeist loss is understandable. I don't blame you for it. I believe that your deck was made in order to min-max against the matchup that you had the most trouble with, which means that side deck against Altergeist is very standard, as you said, because you wanted to side very heavily against the Altergeist deck. And the main deck was mainly built to deal with FTK and Goki, which were probably, I'm not sure if it was the most represented deck at YCS. I do know that Ash and Droll are relatively good against Striker, which is also pretty relevant at this event. And I know that a lot of Dark Warrior or Goki decks did make top cut, and Ash and Droll are very good against those, which is probably why you got to top 8 where you got, because your deck was so built and so well oriented for playing at those high level events where you're going to be expecting Goki and Dark Warrior. So overall, I like the deck. I like how it went, and I believe that it was piloted to a point where it was ran very well. Do I think the deck is going to be good going forward? We don't know, because we don't know what meta we're going to be moving into, because we're expecting a ban list within the next few days. Hopefully, if Konami doesn't dupe us by giving us a 1 month later ban list. But overall, I think the deck is well built. I think it's very well thought out and very good in relativeness to how it deals with the current meta. Going forward, I do believe this deck wouldn't be as strong at a local event because it's built in such a way to deal with such specific decks. But I do believe that overall, it's a very strong Cyber Dragon deck. It's a very fast version of mid-range, which means that you play the game at a very fast pace after you take control of the board with either an Evenly or a Droll. And I believe in that essence, it's a very good version of a mid-range Cyber Dragon deck. And that's my opinions on the deck that Brian Ramirez top 8'd with at YCS Pasadena. So again, before we leave, congratulations on your top 8 at YCS Pasadena. I do like the deck. I do like how it was built. And this is my opinions and my deck analysis on Brian Ramirez's deck profile. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope this helps you understand why Brian played the deck the way he did, and why these ratios, and why this deck was built the way it is. If my opinions are correct, which I hope they are. I hope you enjoyed this video / stream, and if you want to see more of this type of content, please tell I'm so angry, and we will see what we can come up with. We're also hosting a new idea. So if you guys would like to see Yu-Gi-Oh streams in relativeness to new decks or combo-based decks or whatever you want to see, I'm So Angry's channel is really based for the community. So you guys can vote for whatever deck you want to see, and we can basically explore that deck or explore combos with that deck. I have a few decks in mind that I personally like, Fire Fist, Salamangreat. So if you guys want to see that, just let I'm So Angry know, and we'll try to make something out. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the stream, and I hope this video / stream helped you with your understanding of how this deck works.